We're here to talk about welfare and stuff, yeah,
Yep.
and programs.
So specifically, I wanted to talk about universal versus means-tested welfare
Hmm.
and work requirements, right? So I guess just a little bit about me. I'm Mirus. I I'm more generally when I have conversations with like streamers and stuff, I'm generally trying to understand like their ideas, and I'm less interested in like debating them. That might change in the future, but that's the kind of perspective I'm taking now.
Hmm.
Um, So I'm just curious to hear what you think, and I'll ask questions and try to like get a better understanding. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess we can start with the means tested and universal welfare and policies and stuff like that. So, generally, I see that there is more. I think there are pros and cons with both of them, but I think that the generally I prefer means tested programs, and that's for the following reason, basically. So if you have like $100 million, you're gonna invest and you're gonna put in towards some form of welfare and some form of social program. If you put that $100 million into a welfare system or a social program that affects everybody in society equally, sure, it's going to do some good things. It's going to definitely help some people that are, lower down the socioeconomic ladder. They're going to get a good effect from that. But a lot of that money is also going to go to people that don't quite need it as much. Their life isn't going to be as improved as, the people lower down the socioeconomic ladder. So they're gonna enjoy it a bit as well. They're gonna get some benefits from it, but it's not the same as people lower on the ladder are gonna get. Whereas instead, if you have that same 100 million and you invest it more deliberately and you try to target specifically vulnerable and disadvantaged groups, then the amount of like value when it comes to lifting people out of poverty and making people's lives better that you get from that 100 million is going to be a lot higher than if you just invested broadly, like evenly on the top across everybody in society. And that's generally why I like means tested programs more. However, I do also see arguments that having more universal programs might be better from a political pragmatism perspective, where it might be more easy to get people to care about it, to get people to come together and unite in order to achieve something, in order to keep it maintained and stop things from rolling back. And for the political aspect of it specifically, I can see why universal programs may be a bit more effective than means tested ones. But I think that means tested policies have more positives and are able to do things more effectively than what universal ones can.
Right. Yeah, I see that. So there's a couple of areas we could go down, but to me, it basically sounds like you're saying like when you means test things, you're getting more bang for your buck. So you're able
Mm-hmm.
to actually help the people who need help and not necessarily, maybe waste money on people who might not need that help.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Um, so yeah, so I guess I can see that perspective that you know helping like it's if you have a limited amount of money, it's better to use that on helping the people who need it most.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think two things which I would say is one, I think like you said, if that political pragmatism point is true, it's possible that you might be able to accrue like more money, like make it a bigger program if you make it universal, right? Of course, that varies from country to country, like depending on the economy and all. So you can't say that like in a general sense, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and then there are also cases where if you do maybe, let's say that your populace is at a stage where they won't approve of a means tested program necessarily because there won't be enough political will, whereas they would, approve a universal one. In that case, more people are helped if you push for the universal things because something actually gets done. Whereas if you push for the means tested thing, but you fail and therefore nothing happens. So yeah, apart from getting more money, like you point out, it could also be getting something rather than getting nothing. That could also be a potential consequence. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah. And I think the second thing is like, so I'm kind of drawing this from like I'm not like drawing purely from my experience, but generally like, I'm from India, right? Now I'm in the U.S., but so in in India they have public schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in my opinion, these aren't like very good, but they're there and they're free, right? And I think like basically anybody can enter the school if they want to, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, like, just like if you're richer, there's no way you're going to go to a public school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the same thing is true for like for a few different other programs as well. just because the private schools are like that much better. I think like basically by definition, if the government is offering something for free and a company is offering something for money, the company has to offer something more.
Hmm.
Otherwise, there's no point in buying it, right? Um, so so in that way, I feel like to a certain extent, it depends on the program, like if it's mandatory to buy in and things like that. But for some programs, I feel like they can almost means test themselves, right?
I'm not quite. What do you mean by means test themselves? Could you just yeah?
Um,
Could you say it again?
yeah. So essentially, let's give an example of like housing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I want to build some like cheap, affordable housing, and provide it for free if you really need it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not going into all the practical aspects of that. So like as assuming it's like cheap and all, it's probably not going to be the best house. So once you start making like a good amount of money, you're probably going to want to move.
Mm-hmm.
Not only for like oh because I prefer this house, but also probably for other reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um so because of that, essentially we have a situation where the rich people aren't taking advantage of that free housing and only the people who need it are anyway, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I see what you mean there. So it's technically like a universal system in the sense that anyone can take advantage of it, but not anybody will, and not everybody is going to feel the need to or going to even like want to in the first place. So yeah, there are definitely some forms of universal programs you could choose from that that would kind of yeah indirectly means test themselves. Okay, and now I see what you mean.
Yeah, basically. So generally people can yeah, but I guess it depends on the type of program you're doing because if especially if you're forced to buy in, then that's not going to happen, right?
Hmm.
Um but yeah,
Yeah.
and I think talking about the political pragmatism point, I feel like on one hand, obviously if everyone gets something that's kind of that might look better. But I think on the other hand, like you said, because universal programs, you'd probably need more money to get the same level of effect.
Hmm.
Then that price tag is gonna um, make things not very good, especially in places like America, right?
Hmm.
So I think like I'm just trying to point out that like while there is one reason why universal programs might be politically effective, there's also another reason why means tested might actually be politically effective, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a balance because yeah, it's gonna be oftentimes you're gonna be able to accomplish if you want to help a specific group of people with a policy. The amount of let's say you want to improve their we're gonna use some very like abstract and non-existent units of measurements. Let's say you want to improve their condition by 5 degrees of improvement. Okay, let's just say that. Now, if you want to improve their well-being by 5 degrees of improvement, you're going to need less money to accomplish that 5 degrees of improvements in that group with a means tested program than with a universally tested program where you lift everybody sufficiently to the point where that group gets the 5 degrees of improvement that you need. And as an effect of that, because more money might be needed for the universal program as opposed to the means tested program, that might be a reason why it's politically ineffective because people are going to bring up the cost to it as like one of the major inhibitors and why we shouldn't do this policy. Whereas if you kind of have the minimum necessary in order to assist and get the type of improvement in the groups that you're aiming to target with this, you can save a lot of money from that, and that might make people more open to it because it's going to cost less.
Yeah, pretty much. Um, and I think okay, so I was reading this book earlier about welfare and whatnot, and it kind of proposed a unique perspective on welfare.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of like not really related to the previous line of argumentation, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially it's essentially thinking of welfare as just like national insurance, like all forms of welfare is insuring against something, right? So like education forms of welfare will be insuring against the risk that you're not able to afford a good education for your kids, right? Um, and I guess insuring against the risk that you as a kid wouldn't be able to get good education. Something like obviously there's like food-based welfare, which is just insuring against the risk of starving, right? Um, and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we kind of apply that analysis, then in some ways you do want, like, in some ways you want to broaden the you want to broaden the base, right? So we spread the risk as best we can, right? And it's not as and the effects aren't as acute on that population, right?
Mhm.
Um, but I think in some ways the insurance analogy fails in that, like, for example, the people who are more at risk aren't the ones who are paying in more and things like that, right? Um, so essentially, what I'm trying to say is that I feel like means tested programs could create certain form feelings of like resentment and things like that, especially because like richer people or people who are paying more taxes might feel like, okay, I'm just paying for like the risk to handle the risk of all these other people, and yeah, so I'm kind of just shifting the conversation to more like how do we talk about welfare effectively?
Yeah, I see what you mean. This was something I thought about previously as well. How maybe a more universal thing. Yeah, kind of where I talk about it. It's like, hey, this is something that unites all of us. It puts all of us together. We're all in the same boat. Every money we spend, it benefits us all to some extent, in different ways. And therefore, with more means tested programs where there are taxes going into a program that could maybe be universal and could benefit everybody, obviously to differing degrees. Um, but then obviously they would probably be more likely to be okay with that or to be in support of that, than if it was just being targeted towards a specific group, which if you're wealthy is probably not going to be you in most of the cases. um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that's another reason in favor of like more of the political pragmatism of universal programs, so to say. So I guess you would just have to, when it comes to political pragmatism, the things you have on the both different sides is that universal programs can cost more and it can be less economically efficient when it comes to being able to ascertain the outcomes, and that can throw people off of it and make people less likely to be in favor of it. Although, if I had to guess, I would say that the other reasons for the universal programs, such as the easiness of the rhetoric, the fact that, oh, we're all in the same boat, the fact that, hey, this is all gonna help you to different extents, but it's gonna help you to some extent at least. I think those are probably going to be more major reasons for people to care about the policy and be in support of it than, it might be a little bit more expensive. Yeah, I would still say probably overall universal programs are better for political pragmatism purposes. But yeah, I think I would
Yeah.
like free of the political process. I think that if you're talking about just efficient budget allocation, means this is probably the optimal way to go there. So I guess it would depend then for what I would be in favor of. It depends on how they poll, basically, right? If you have like a policy and it's like, hey, here are two kind of similar policies. They try to accomplish the same thing. One of them is universal, one of them is mean tested, and you just see the universal one just outperforming the means tested one, who might be falling behind or might be failing by significant margins. Then okay, I'm guess for that purpose, for that policy, I'm in favor of it being universal. But if you can get the same policy passed in a mean tested manner, then I'm probably going to be in favor of the means tested one. But yeah.
Right. So essentially, if you were like able to accomplish anything you wanted politically, you would go for means tested programs like 99% of the time. But
Mhm.
since obviously you can't, and you feel like in a lot of situations, universal programs might have a better chance, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah. So, yeah. So I guess the way that I normally see the programs is essentially we're taking money from the population, right? And we're trying to apply it in areas which give us like much better outcomes, right? Or more bang for your buck or whatever,
Hmm.
right? And generally there's always going to be some level of inefficiency in that, not just because, obviously a government is imperfect in everything, but I think also oh god, I'm trying to remember my like high school econ classes.
Uh-huh.
But like even like in terms of the market, there'll be like some inefficiency generated
Uh-huh.
when you tax, either if you tax certain products or tax different people and whatnot,
I
right?
think the name of it is like,
Uh,
I think it's dead weight loss, or loss of welfare, but
yeah,
not defined as welfare state, but just like, yeah, well, I think
yeah,
it's something like
that
that. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's also, I guess, um, a third form of inefficiency, which I would say, which is, well, I guess it's, you can kind of probably roll it in
Mm-hmm.
to one of the other two, but basically
Is this
it's
a means
like
tested inefficiency or a universal inefficiency or like a government inefficiency?
uh, means tested,
Okay.
like specifically to do with, you have to prove that you deserve, like, you're within the demographic which you get this
Mm-hmm.
income and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a burden depending on how stringent the process is, how inefficient the government is,
It can actually
and
end up
things
being
like
more
that.
expensive, yeah. If it's very
Yeah.
difficult and if it's very like financially burdensome to do that the checking process to see like who's entitled to it and do the verification process and stuff like that, and would have just been cheaper to provide it universally, then I mean the main benefit for the means test it just goes out the window, right? Because then you're no longer
Yeah.
being more effective with your allocation, and at that point you might just do universally, and you spend like an equal or maybe even lesser amount of money, but more people get the benefit as a whole. So if that's the case, then yeah, definitely. Then I mean, there's really no purpose, I don't think, for means tested programs. But then the degree to which that's likely to happen is going to be affected by a bunch of other policies, such as the efficiency of the government, such as the investment into, data, tracking software and a bunch of different public institutions and funding for them to be able to keep track of these things, and yeah, and the rest of that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I see what you mean. In that case, there's no reason to do means tested, but we can reduce the likelihood of that happening by having basically a more efficient government, which can be accomplished by good funding and logistical structures.
Yeah. I think I'd also want to point out that like if the government is a little bit inefficient,
Hmm.
and a rich person is trying to deal with that, they can probably deal with that a bit more effectively than a poorer person.
Hmm.
Poor people might not have the time to, go to like whatever office and get the things done,
Hmm.
or they might not be able to travel very easily to those areas, or a wide variety of reasons. So, like in that situation, I think essentially, I mean, I guess not all main tested programs have to be specifically for poor people, but generally speaking, there are, right?
Hmm.
So I guess like that's just like another reason why like the efficiency is like even more important in that area, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
So I guess the conclusion for this part of the yeah, for this train of thought is that hey, there are definitely a wide range of possibilities by which that main theoretical reason for supporting means tested programs is undermined or maybe even disappears completely or becomes a disadvantage. And if that's the case with any one given policy or whatever, then yeah, I mean, then there is then I would no longer be in support of means tested program, obviously, because my one theoretical reasons for being in favor of that is now no longer met and no longer actually happening. So there's no reason for me to be in favor of it. While it seems maybe a bit harder to or less likely for like empirically the effects of a universal program to shake out with a lot of variation as opposed to the means tested one way.
yeah, yeah, I would agree. I think even if these differences are there, I feel like compared to the cost of like actually, um like providing this to like the rest of the population, I feel like that's probably going to be more in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously you'd have to probably do some analysis and stuff there, depending on the situation.
Yeah, definitely.
um but yeah, I mean that's basically the universal slash means tested portion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you want to talk about in that area, or
On
are you
that
good?
specifically, I think that was those were the main things. I will say that they were yeah, these were interesting trains of thought and different like trains of the conversation. So I appreciate that. But yeah, then we
Fine.
had the work requirement things, right?
Yeah. So from my so okay, actually first I'll just ask you like what is your opinion on work requirements? Yeah.
I think that there should be some level of basic welfare assurance that is provided regardless of employment status. You can also make it a bit less black and white by, having programs that are focused on you making like a good effort towards getting employed and you being registered with them and you having like interviews or whatever. Now, obviously, that also incurs its own administrative and bureaucratic costs, but yeah, it's something
Yeah.
that's important to note nevertheless. But I do think that there should be some base standard of living provided by social programs, regardless of if you're employed or not. That allows you to live basically, and so you don't
Right.
like starve or die of like disease or whatever. I do think that that should definitely be the case regardless. I do, however, believe that when it comes to work requirements, it's all going to depend on how effectively they incentivize people to actually go and look for work. So a recent reminder, a recent case of this happening is um, I remember people were talking about the issues in relation to the lack of labor in the United States of America at the moment, and a lot of people were saying that, oh, look, this is because of the coronavirus stimulus. This is because of assistance that they received, like extended unemployment or whatever. And then you actually notice that, hey, when you stripped away those extended unemployment benefits or whatever, and kind of like locked them behind employment indirectly, at least that standard of living, you didn't see a change in the amount of people seeking employment. So in that case, the lack of that, or whatever, the changing of the incentivization structures didn't actually accomplish any different outcomes when it comes to affecting employment. And in that case, you didn't kind of really accomplish what you're doing. But if yeah, apart from this basic welfare floor, if certain more additional social programs or whatever can be provided under like a work guideline or work restrictions, then yeah, and they're shown to effectively incentivize people to look for work and get employed, then yeah, I'm in favor of them. If they don't effectively do that, then no, I'm probably against it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess for me, I kind of see it similar to like I forget the name, and I don't know if this is there in Europe as well. But like things like 401k plans or like Roth IRAs and investment things where
Pensions,
essentially the
yeah.
government, yeah,
Hmm.
so essentially the government encourages you to do that by, maybe not taxing right now and doing different things like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like that kind of like essentially it's a similar thing where, um, it's encouraging you to do something which is probably good for you. At least it should be, right?
Hmm.
And it's based, and the government is basically like just giving you money for doing it, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, so I think that I agree that I think most of the data doesn't show that work require or doesn't show that welfare necessarily has a negative impact on people seeking employment,
Hmm.
right? In fact, I'm pretty sure it has a positive one because of increasing demand and things like that.
Hmm.
Or maybe I'm not sure.
Yeah,
But
maybe increasing demand, but also like allowing people to be in a position where they can reasonably like look for a job, right? So for instance, if you're like homeless, then in a lot of cases it's going to be very fucking difficult for you to get employment because you don't have like a permanent residence address. So you can't, yeah, you can't get, communication from there. You might not be able to set up an interview or anything like that because of the lack of like a residence address. So in those cases, having basic standards of welfare also like directly makes it easier for you to get employed. So yeah, just want to add that.
yeah, yeah, I think yeah, and I think even like in a more general sense, I feel like having welfare, like hypothetically, if I was if there's someone who got like a, I don't know, computer science like master's or PhD or something,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously has very good employment prospects, but says like, I don't want to do this. I feel like really depressed every day in the office or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think a welfare, like a basic standard of welfare, like you want,
Mm-hmm.
is would give that person the freedom to kind of go and do like what they're actually passionate about, and hopefully more people doing the things they're passionate about is better. But obviously there are some things like obviously I'm not like completely in the direction where like everybody should just do what they want to do and stuff like that, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously that this type of like welfare has to be like, it has to be like within reason. It should never be the case where it is um and this isn't necessarily because the welfare is too high. It could also, in a lot of cases, be because of the bad state of like the labor market. But we generally never in society want to have a have a condition where it's more profitable to be unemployed and on welfare than to get employed for like for your own personal like economic well being. We never want that to be the case. And a lot of people, a
Yeah.
lot of like right wingers and conservatives will say that and then be like, okay, we're going to use this, and then with that prescription, we're going to say we got lower welfare to make that balance like less, to fix that balance. Whereas in a lot of cases, and this seems to be something that I missed, especially in Sweden, it's a pretty common argument that hey, maybe the problem isn't with the amount of welfare, maybe the problem is with the state of labor markets or the employment opportunities for certain groups, in society or whatever, and that's the reason why that kind of scale and why that balance is kind of in the wrong place at the moment. So but yeah, we should keep
Yeah.
that as a general goal that hey, it should always be more profitable. Should always be better for you to be employed than to be living off welfare and be unemployed. And 99% of the cases that's true. But
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a, how do I describe this? I think like to a certain extent there's a like there'll be like a balancing factor where of course, I mean we're seeing this with restaurants right now, right? Like um if there was a situation where people preferred to not work and just get welfare as opposed to working
mm-hmm,
and getting their wage and I guess welfare,
mm-hmm,
some less welfare, I guess. I feel like that would obviously necessarily incentivize companies to increase the compensation for the employment, right?
mm-hmm,
Um, but I think like obviously that's from a very sort of I guess classical economic sort of perspective.
mm-hmm.
There are situations where that might not be the case, especially if once we start talking about capital and how like companies might start preferring to you know use more capital as opposed to employing people and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. And it can also be things like not necessarily that the wages are too low, but for certain groups in society that might disproportionately have a lack of education opportunities or like an educated background. For them specifically, their capabilities within the job market that they're situated in are so extraordinarily limited that they're most likely going to maybe be better off being on welfare. And that's like another domain where like hey, here's something else that's like broken in our societal structure. There's something that's missing here, there's something that needs to be addressed, and it can and it can express itself in people being on welfare or whatever. So yeah, it's like definitely multifaceted. There are a bunch of different explanations for things like you mentioned, that like low compensation for example. But
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, I don't know. I think like generally I feel like welfare in a lot of situations just has to you have to like look at it on a case by case basis. Like I don't think you're ever going to be able to say like, oh, no matter what, welfare is good or welfare is bad or this type of welfare is good or whatnot.
mm-hmm,
Um, I think it depends a lot on the like government and the economy and the like situation. It can even depend on like the international situation. Like I remember I was reading an article about I think the US they subsidized a lot of I think it was like some farmers who basically got screwed because of the harvest and stuff like that.
mm-hmm,
And but that kind of pissed off Canada
okay,
because it was almost like a form of protectionism, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so I think like sometimes there can be situations where I guess it depends on the sort of welfare, but if you're providing industry specific welfare, that can worsen international relations sometimes because it feels like you're being like doing like protectionism basically. Right?
Oh yeah, definitely. When it comes to, especially, this is also true for uh just have curiosity, did you what high school curriculum did you take?
I did IB,
I'm
IBDP.
recognizing, I'm an IB kid as well. I'm recognizing all of the examples you're saying here. Higher level economics
Yeah.
or standard level?
I did higher level.
Same. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I'm noticing it. I'm just in the way you're speaking. I'm picking up on a lot of the similar examples in the textbook and whatever. Yeah, exactly. When it comes
Right.
to international competition and protectionism stuff like that. Same with, and this is from the book as well. Same with subsidies as well to certain industries. How people might feel like, hey, you're artificially making your manufacturing more competitive than ours, and it's offsetting the what's supposed to be perfect competition, and it's disadvantaging us, like each picks or whatever. Yeah, so that's definitely the case. I do want to take this opportunity as well to go into some slightly related tangent, which is when you said that
Mhm.
like, hey, well, for case by case basis, we need to look at like what it does. I think that this is just something that needs to be thought about more with everything politically related. Is that you get a lot of people being caught up on, okay, hey, this policy might generally be good for this thing, and then their attachment towards that thing stems in what it is. So like, oh, I am pro welfare. I am pro high taxation. I am pro la 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 la. Um, and in
Right.
specific context, that's a perfectly fine statement to make, 100%. I mean, I've done it in multiple occasions. But when it comes to the way you conceptualize things in a more broader discussions, the only reason why we should ever be in favor of those things is because they accomplish some forms of like final outcome, right? It's because they have an outcome we feel
Right.
desirable. We want higher taxes, not because higher taxes themselves are inherently good, but because it's going to help us provide for things. It's going to help us fund these important programs. It's going to help us resolve, wealth inequalities in society and income inequalities or whatever. We want welfare, not because welfare is like intrinsically good or whatever, but because it's going to lead to a better quality of life towards the average citizen and a safety support net that the most vulnerable people can take advantage of. And we always need to never lose track of the end outcome that we're accomplishing. Don't get too dug in on the
Yeah.
policy or the means, because if you do that, then you might miss, marginal or edge cases where that policy actually has adverse outcomes in those things that we're looking for. And because you're so dug into the
Right.
policy, you don't realize it, and you end up being counterproductive in your advocacy.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually going to just talk about that sort of idea of like heavily. So I basically agree with you. I generally take a more like, especially when it comes to economics, I take a more like utilitarian approach. But I think like there's a lot of people on Twitch politics in the world generally who are like who moralize the economics a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And by that I mean like, talking things like, okay, do these people deserve welfare or not? Do these people deserve this thing or that thing, or do the rich deserve to get taxed more and things like that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I guess for me this seems like for me this is kind of like an unintuitive kind of approach. Like I don't find this intuitive, but yeah, I guess I just wonder, like, why do you think that sort of is? Do you think it's just being dug into positions, or it's like a fundamental sort of difference in values?
It's easier to be like, hey, I'm pro high taxes. I'm pro taxing the rich. I'm pro da da da. Than saying like, hey, I'm in favor of wealth redistribution. I'm in favor of reducing inequalities. I'm in favor of funding our important social programs. And I think currently the best way, generally to accomplish that is through taxing the rich. One of them is obviously a lot easier to talk about, a lot easier to conceptualize in your head, a lot catchier, and the other one is I think more accurate, more productive, but it's more wordy, it takes more words, it takes more thoughts, and it's more flexible and it's more nuanced. And because it's way
Yeah.
easier to go for simplistic and catchy, and you might not even intend to do it. It might just be like a subconscious things that happen by the reiteration of all these things constantly in your like political in your particular circles or whatever, that you might get too caught up on, yeah, on the means more than the ends. So I think
Right.
it's a combination of everything, of a wide range of
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah. I think like focusing on the means, well, obviously, it's like a valid moral system to like pursue, I guess, but I think like a lot of the times if I say that welfare is good like inherently, then I never have to do any research about like the effects of welfare, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um and like if so it just makes things very easy for me to argue. Obviously it doesn't make me very persuasive, but it makes it very easy for me to believe what I want to believe without changing my mind, I think.
Mm-hmm.
um and I think like kind okay, how do I say this? Um, I lost it. Just go ahead.
Um, I guess maybe you could have been saying that. I mean, it's easier for people to fall into like comfort and the more group oriented aspects of political. I'm not quite sure what you were going to say, um, but yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think yeah, I think like there's also a degree of, if I think that this thing is inherently good,
Hmm.
um, then I can very easily essentially demonize the other side, because now it's become like a moral question and not a, you know,
Pragmatic one.
but yeah, not a pragmatic question.
Hmm.
And I think well, I think the normal person doesn't necessarily like choose to say like I want to believe this because it lets me demonize the other side better. I think people respond better to anger, and like things which make them angry, and drives a lot of engagement and stuff. And
Hmm.
that encourages, media and political commentators and things like that to focus on that sort of discussion as opposed to just this is kind of the most pragmatic thing, right?
Definitely. It also becomes simpler, right? You think something like a specific policy or whatever means is inherently good or bad. It's super easy for you to form your opinions on different political parties, on different like international situations, on the politics of any one given nation. You look for these given things, you look for these given goals, and you see, okay, they're doing this means by which to get something. These people are not doing these means, therefore this is correct and this is not correct. This is good, this is bad. Whereas if you have the other approach, you need to be like, okay, these parties are in favor of these are in favor of this. Now what approach solves the outcome better? What approach gives the best results? And that can very
Right.
much vary, not even like on a national level between different nations. It definitely does there, but even within like local or different regions of the same country, maybe even different parts of like a same city, if it's like a very large city or whatever, there can be like a lot of variation there. So it becomes easier for you to form your opinions on stuff, because it becomes more simple basically. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think one reason why people might find it more simple is because I think like in your personal life, even if I might like be like a utilitarian or whatever, like in my personal life, I'm not like going about my life thinking like, oh, if I do this action, I'm going to maximize like utility or I'm going to lead to good outcomes. A lot of the times I instead am trying to do good things or be a good person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, deontology and virtue ethics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like I think that perspective works on a personal level because it can be kind of weird to think about like, oh, if I lie to this person this time, is it like going to increase utility or not and things like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
much easier to think like I want to be an honest person or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but I think like that perspective doesn't really work when it comes to like systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like broader sort of things because like it's yeah, it's just like different, I guess. But
Yeah, definitely.
um, yeah. I'm just thinking if there's anything else I want to talk about. I think I brought up one other thing
Mm-hmm.
here, right? Yeah, I guess I mentioned possible non-welfare programs. So I guess to talk about what is or isn't welfare, I guess first we need to define like what exactly is welfare as opposed to other government programs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess for me, like, while it's easy to take a very broad description of welfare to describe like basically any time the government gives back to the community,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think a more helpful description might be like a situation where the government gives to like um I guess I okay. So just before I talk about that, are you kind of aware of like what a public good is?
Yep.
Yeah. So do you want to explain it for the audience or whatever?
Yeah, so from my understanding, a public good is something that is funded or is provided for by like an entity or by any yeah by any entity really, and then it's something that can be taken advantage of regardless of whether or not you actually paid into it in the first place necessarily. So it's kind of like it forms yeah, like a base structure. It's a funding for a given thing that anyone
Yeah.
can take advantage of and use, regardless of whether or not you actually personally like funded it or put resources into it from the
Yeah.
get go.
So I'm mainly focusing on that second aspect. Like basically you can't restrict people from making use of it to a large extent. So like streetlights is one like common example, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think welfare generally I think it would mainly refer to situations um where the government is providing things which aren't like public goods. So like, food, healthcare. Obviously there are like external impacts to getting these things, but I think it's very different from saying like, you can't stop someone from getting healthcare or getting food or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see what you mean. I think that's probably I think that the definition there is a bit more specified, and that it has more value than just whenever the government provides anything for its citizenry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess to talk about non-welfare programs, like the cool thing about non-welfare, I don't know if it's a cool thing or not, but one interesting thing about non-welfare programs is like at least based on the definition I gave, they can only be provided by the government, pretty much. Because obviously no company is going to want to create something which they can't monetize, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't monetize something if you can't restrict people from using it, if they don't pay for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, or I guess, I mean, there are charity cases and all, but that's like different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess I think one common example which is given about non-welfare programs which are helpful is obviously like things like roads. So we have like toll roads and stuff, but I guess just like excluding those for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're basically in like roads and things like that are essentially things where the so one thing is that the government can't necessarily, it can be more difficult to say like we provided X amount to people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just because you're not like it's not like on that one-to-one basis, right?
Yeah.
So I think in some ways it can be less pragmatic in that way, or less or harder to market, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but on the other hand, I feel like roads and things like that might be. I feel like to a certain extent they seem very. Um, I don't know, very. Um, Yeah, it's hard to say. I guess like it's very difficult for you to separate yourself from the people receiving the benefits, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, what do you think about I guess another example would be regulations. You can consider that like something where everybody benefits from them, even if they don't pay in or anything. They can't really be restricted to certain people, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Certain
So
consumers.
I wonder then, under your definition of welfare, would public education be included in that?
Um, Yeah, I think so. Because I mean, of course, like I said, there are like outstanding impacts or like helpful impacts, which can help other people as a result of one person getting the product. But
Mm-hmm.
I think at the same time, we can define like this is the person who got the product, right?
Yeah.
Very easily.
So,
Yeah,
but if you have like let's say you have a system where like you only have public schools.
right.
Those are all the types of schools that exist, and everybody goes to public schools, and it's funded with taxpayer money. And in that case, would you still consider it to be welfare?
Um, yeah, I think so. I think like so the important thing is not necessarily whether it is provided to everybody, regardless of whether they pay in or not, or it's just like the focus is on the nature of the actual product
Mm-hmm.
and whether it can be restricted or not, right?
Okay. So what is it then that fundamentally separates that kind of public school system from publicly funded roads, for example?
Um, so what I think separates it is again not talking about tolls is basically when I construct a road, I
Mm-hmm.
can't um it's you can't really say, oh, I'm giving it to these people. I just have to say I'm constructing the road for everybody to use basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I guess you can say it has to be universal, and it has to be yeah, I guess it just has to be completely universal. Like
Isn't
I
the
guess
public
technically
education in
you
that
can
case also kind of universal?
um I mean, it is, but it doesn't have to be, right? Which I feel like, I guess in some situations they would be kind of seen as the same thing.
Mhm.
But I think like for me, I see a pretty clear distinction between like products which are provided, which can be provided to individual people, or individual people can be prevented from getting access to, and products which everybody has access to. I guess maybe, hmm, um, because one thing I'm thinking about is like if I build a road inside like if I build like a race car track or whatever inside my like $1 billion mansion or whatever, right?
Mhm.
Um, then like then that's like that's basically, you can't say that's a public good because I can stop people from going on it.
Mhm.
So maybe there's something to do related to like um the land the good is on has to be public, perhaps. And anybody can basically go there. I'm
I'm
not
not
sure.
sure. I haven't thought about like specifically this definition before, so I don't know if I have a good answer to that question. I guess it's easy for people to intuitively say, okay, this is welfare, this isn't welfare, but then when you kind of get break it down, you get more fundamental. It's hard to think of like a definition that, yeah, that excludes everything that we don't generally conceive or consider as welfare in society, while including everything that we do. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if I necessarily have an answer for that. But you touch. I think we can agree that the regulations probably. Maybe if we do it in the sense that, um, for the purposes of this, what are policies we could enact that don't like directly provide something for the citizenry. So for example, regulations.
Yeah.
They don't provide anything inherently. They change the nature of an economy, of like a civil structure. Yeah, sure. But they don't give anything. They don't give anything that like a good or a service that can be taken advantage of directly. Um so I guess
Right.
regulation would be one of those policies. Um when it
Another
could
could be like firemen, or the existence of like fire stations. I guess maybe because
that's also
like
like a
you're providing obviously the service to stop fire,
mhm.
but on the other hand you're not provide on the other, like from my perspective, it's not like, well, I guess you could have fire stations which only help some people, so yeah, I guess that would still be considered welfare,
Yeah,
never mind that.
maybe things like taxation specifically with the ends of like reducing wealth inequality in mind would be considered as one of those policies, because there
Yeah,
you don't have anything that's provided to anyone. In fact, it's depending on your idea of the taxation and then the rest of it, it's something that at least intuitively feels like, okay, it's something that's been taken away from you, right? Or from
yeah.
certain groups in society. Now, obviously, it's more complicated than that. I don't think taxation is theft. We don't have to go on there, but yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess like regulation, taxation, um, the formation of new public institutions that can keep track of things. So maybe the formation of like a well-funded public institution that helps maybe keep track on a lot of the metrics that we would use for potentially means tested programs would be some good infrastructure to set up that would make means tested programs more economically efficient and would reduce the risk that the cost of means testing would outweigh
Yeah.
the universal, just making it universal as a whole. So yeah, those are some things that I would think of them under this new definition that we thought of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those can be like, those are basically things which are very like, I think which can be very pretty obviously like said like, okay, this isn't welfare, even on an intuitive sense. Um yeah, I guess, yeah, I'm not too sure about other examples, but yeah, I mean, I think like sometimes we talk a lot about welfare and government welfare,
Mhm.
but I think sometimes like a lot of these other things can also be helpful.
Definitely, they're all part of the
Yeah,
puzzle.
yeah, the reason I brought it up was just because I was reading some book called Beyond Welfare. Well, I started reading it, but then it was like super boring, so I stopped reading
Okay.
it. But but yeah, I just thought I'd bring it up.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that's basically everything I wanted to talk about welfare. Is there anything else you want to touch on or discuss?
Um, I think that these were the main things. Probably. I guess I just have like did you fun thing did you graduate like last year from
Um,
IB?
la last or last year.
Last year. You
I'm
had
a
your exams
sophomore in
canceled then,
college
yeah?
now. Yeah,
How did you feel about
yeah.
that?
I was kind of sad about it. Well, I mean, obviously, it's good to like you don't have to study for exams, but for me, this was a situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like at the top of my game, right?
Okay.
Before the exams were canceled, I was literally like I took math at Yale, so I was
Uh-huh.
literally able to finish like a math paper or whatever and get like 90% plus in like 30 minutes, right?
Jesus.
So I
AA or
felt really
AI?
good about it. Um, I don't think that was there for my
Oh,
school.
you're
I
right,
don't
you're
know.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but I think ours focus more on calculus, if that it has a difference.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so and then I think I don't know why. Okay, actually I do know why. So you know how the way they predicted things, they essentially looked at, oh, did the school over or under predict last year and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So my school kind of has like a wave pattern where like they over predict one year, under
Oh
predict
no.
the next year and stuff like that. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I was the under predicted one
Oh.
group.
Okay.
And yeah, it was actually super sad
Wait,
for all
they
the teachers.
generally underpredicted? Like right before? Or
Like so because IB saw that the our school over predicted the previous
okay.
year,
All right, I got
they
it.
under predicted us, right? Um so yeah, I don't know. I felt it was pretty tragic for our school
Mm-hmm.
because my batch of students was considered like a really good batch, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously at the end we didn't get to kind of prove ourselves or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't like harm my college prospects or whatever, so it was fine.
Okay. Yeah, that's all it's about, right? It's the ends, not the means.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
yeah, no, I was just gonna check that because I just in relation to economics specifically, I graduated the year after you then. Um
All right.
and it was like up in the air until like the last month whether or not we were gonna have exams or
Uh,
not. Um which was
you guys
obviously
had exams, right?
we did have well half of like some schools did not have exams, some of them did, so it was like split depending on
Got
where
it.
you lived and stuff, so that was also a bit strange,
Okay.
but they didn't make a final decision until like I think like a month or something before, maybe even less time, which
Okay.
is
Yeah.
super stressful, right? Because you don't know if you need to study or not. Obviously, I did study because you should study if it's up in the air,
Yeah.
but I can understand why it might have been harder, might be more tough, and might be more uncertain, harder for a lot of people to study then. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then we ended up doing
Um,
exams, and that went fine. But I remember my economics because we had online school there as well. Um,
yeah.
Jesus, my so we like my economics teacher was fine generally. It was all good. But when we went to online, we had online school maybe 6 months or something like that, 4 or 5 months
Right.
something, and we didn't have a single online class with the economics teacher. He would just be like, "Oh, just read these
Oh
pages,
God.
lol." And if you have any questions, send me an email. And that was it. We didn't have a single class. It was just him
God.
telling us to read
Yeah.
the book, which was not great. But I did find economics anyway, so I'm chilling. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Cool. What did you do like diploma or did you do a certificate or whatever?
IB IB diploma.
Okay. Yeah. So what was your extended essay on?
Economics. I did it about the effects of Trump's tariffs on the manufacturing sector in the United States of America.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think I did. Well, I didn't do that exact thing. I did something somewhat similar, but obviously simpler for an IA.
Hmm.
Um, but my extended essay was in maths. I did some graphing stuff and whatnot. Basically.
Hmm.
Basically, I showed how to graph some complex functions, like numbers which take a complex number in and like, put a complex number out.
Okay.
And there are a few different ways you can graph that because the problem is it's in 4 dimensions, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I compared some different ways and showed them applied to like a few different functions and said like, oh, this way is better for this sort of thing and whatnot. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I did I think that what you did is more similar to the next year we ended up having two different types of math courses. We had applications and
Right.
interpretations, which is basically more stats, and then we
Right.
had an analysis and approaches, which was I think that's more what you did. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I
Yeah.
did
I
I did
think so.
AI. I did the stats course more, and I'm happy I didn't do my extended essay maths. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. My school, like the batch before me didn't have any maths extended essay people.
Mm-hmm.
And the batch before that had only two.
Mm-hmm.
And neither of them got A's. So yeah, I
Oh, I
mean,
see.
I like when it comes to academic stuff, I'm very like puritanical, I guess. Like I'm very like, I don't really care about the practical stuff. I'm just going to do what I enjoy, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I did it. But yeah, I mean, I did pretty well in the end. So yeah.
Yeah, that's good. You get a lot of mixed experiences from people talking about IB as a whole. It's a lot of ups and downs, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
good to hear that you got through it fine.
Yeah, cool. Good to hear the same. Yeah, I guess I um I hope I hope that we can have more conversations in the future
Mhm.
because I enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, that's it from me, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Just let me know if you want to talk about something, and if you have any socials or anything you want to mention.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I go by Mirus_01 on Twitch and MyrusCast on YouTube. And yeah, like my stuff is linked in all of the other areas, so you can just go there and find the other stuff. But yeah,
All right, excellent. Well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
you too.
Bye bye.
Bye.